Welcome back, Grace and the Gray listeners, to part 2 of our chilling journey into a story that's echoed throughout history. I'm James, and along with Sam and Ben, we pick up where we left off. Jesus of Nazareth, accused of treason, stands before Pontius Pilate. The crowd hums with unrest, a Roman governor wields ultimate power, and a trial teeters on the edge of conspiracy and sacrifice. Buckle up. We're diving straight into the heart of Jerusalem, where the next twist awaits.
There was a very specific expectation from Jews when they heard about the Messiah based on the Maccabean revolt, which was violent overthrow. Jesus comes to Jerusalem. That is not only literarily and narratively in the Gospels the climax of the story, but even for those experiencing Jesus' life and ministry, they would have seen that as the climax of his ministry as well. So this is the big moment. And then it's a whole week leading up to his trial, his death, and he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything according to the people who had this expectation that he would be a revolutionary like the Maccabees. He's saying things to Pilate like, yes, I am king of the Jews, but my kingdom is not of this world. We're not about to have some kind of physical battle back and forth for worldly power. What you need to understand, or what you don't understand, is that I already have the power whether you allow me to or not. I've got it. So in that sense, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if it was the same exact people, or even if there's just this massive shift in public opinion concerning who Jesus is over the span of a week as we come to the climax, the denouement of this entire story, and nothing. In fact, he's on trial pending sentencing of death. So that's not looking good in the first place as far as some kind of revolutionary overthrow of Roman power. So yeah, maybe different people, maybe the same people. We don't know. Maybe
manipulated, maybe of their own volition.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the execution. Was this the ultimate sacrifice? And I want to open it with kind of talking about how brutal the crucifixion was and what Jesus had to endure physically.
Yeah.
So a while back, in one of our message series, it's probably been a couple years, Pastor Philip, who's our senior pastor here at Cedar Creek Church, mentioned a book called The Case for Christ. And I love all of the details. Like, I want to know, not that I was coming at it from a skeptic's perspective, but I wanted to learn more. And if you've never heard of the book, it's written by Lee Strobel, and he was a skeptic. He was an atheist who wanted to prove to himself that none of this was true. And so he was an investigative journalist and went down the path of investigating all of the claims about Jesus. And so he interviewed a lot of different people. And, you know, it's crazy because there's no autopsy because there was no body. So we can't really rely on autopsy evidence, but there was a lot of evidence based on the details in the Gospels. So after the Last Supper, Jesus and the disciples go to the Garden of Gethsemane. So I'm backing up on our timeline. This is before the trial and everything. In the Garden of Gethsemane, in the Gospels, Luke 22:44 says that Jesus was sweating blood. And so to me, that sounds like
stress.
Well, yeah, and an exaggeration. Like, that can't really happen, right? And so in Lee Strobel's investigation, he talks to one of the medical experts that he interviewed, and it's called hematidrosis, and it is an actual medical event that basically the sweat becomes tinged with blood because you're to the point of such stress and anxiety, like the capillaries are releasing
in your skin,
blood into your skin. Yeah.
Whoa.
So he really was sweating blood. And then Lee Strobel in his book even goes further into the floggings. And so, Ben, can you kind of talk about like the timeline leading up to the cross? Because I've jumped backwards to the Garden of Gethsemane, but now I'm going back to he's been sentenced.
Flash forward, he's been sentenced, but Pontius is still not quite ready to make that final push to just have Jesus killed. So he does one more thing. And what he does is he sentences Jesus to be brutally beat. I mean, just mangled. So, and the reason you know just how bad it is because Pontius's motivation is, maybe I can have Jesus beaten so badly that when I bring him back before the crowds, they'll take pity on him and they'll decide that they don't want to move forward with the execution.
Like that was enough.
Sentence. Yeah. And these are people who would have routinely seen executions and some very harsh sentences being carried out from the Roman Empire. So he wants Jesus to be beaten so badly that for people who see these things routinely, they would even take pity on him. So that's how badly Jesus is beaten. There's lots more information, about what he's beaten with, how badly he's beaten, how much blood is drawn from him, what's normal for somebody who's been sentenced to crucifixion as far as those beatings, all those kind of things. But that to me is the headline, is that Pontius has Jesus beaten so bad that in his mind he can elicit some empathy out of the people who routinely see people beaten very badly. So he hasn't beaten that bad. So yeah.
And so I do want to share this because it takes your breath away to think about how badly he was beaten. Like you said, I mean, the Roman floggings were brutal. So they took a braided leather whip, basically, and at the end of the whip there were metal balls, and then kind of further up, and I can actually link to an image in our show notes so you can see what it looks like.
Thank you, Sam.
And there were pieces of bone also braided into the leather. So, I mean, you're being beaten by a whip with metal balls and bone tied to it. From the middle of your back, the top of your back, all the way down to the back of your legs. And these lacerations were so deep that it went into the skeletal muscles, and it caused something called hypovolemic shock. And I had no idea what that was. And so basically, hypovolemic shock, it creates all these different side effects in your body, which were weakness, thirst, blood loss. Basically, he's in critical condition.
Yeah.
So like you were saying, of course, Pontius Pilate is trying to elicit sympathy from the onlookers, but it's also fulfilling prophecy, which we'll get to a little further down. So now that he's been flogged, anything else with the timeline before we move to the cross?
No, pretty much once that's done, and this was the common way to perform a execution by crucifixion, was to have the criminal carry his own cross. And that's what Jesus does to a place called Golgotha. And yeah, it's literally translated the place of the skull, and it also sounds like it should be literally translated the place of the skull. It has like all of this like gravitas, and it's said that it's literally like it looks like a skull the way that this hill is formed into the earth. So yeah, that's what he does.
And so when he's carrying this cross, I guess he carries it to Golgotha.
Golgotha. No, not just Golgotha. Golgotha.
So when they get to the destination, the spikes are driven through his wrist. Now, from the paintings that we've all seen growing up, we've seen spikes in the center of his palm, but that wouldn't make sense, right? It has to be through his wrist so that when he's hung up,
structure.
So his hands aren't just ripped out by the weight of his body.
Possible. So there's different ways that crucifixions. You have to remember crucifixions took place through a very broad swath of history. We did find, I think it was in like the 1960s, the body of someone who was crucified under Roman rule. And as far as hands, I don't remember off the top of my head what the specifics were there, but I know for feet, so ankles together to the side, single nail driven through both heels.
Oh.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Also, isn't it horrible?
Well, that makes sense because in the imagery I have in my mind, the body's always slightly turned.
Yeah, turned at the bottom and then straight across at
Never
the top.
thought about that.
Yeah. So, and the reason we know that specifically for the feet, and I don't know about the hands, but in this case, when they took the body down, they could not get the nail out because it was straight through the bones like that. So it still had the nail through the heel bones. Of course, there's nothing left on the body except for bones at that point, but there's still a nail driven through the heel bones.
Okay, so the spike through the wrist, it would have pierced the median nerve, which would be crushed, causing extreme pain. And I think that that's a very big understatement. So like if you, in Lee Strobel's interview with Metherall, I didn't get his first name, but Metherall is the expert. He's saying, if you were to bump your elbow on a door and you get that funny bone feeling.
Tingle, yeah.
He said it would be like taking a wrench and grabbing that nerve and then twisting it. Continuously, never ending, that kind of pain. So that's what is going on with his arms and his wrists. Okay. So his arms are outstretched and his shoulders are dislocated. Mm-hmm. Again, we're getting into that prophecy fulfillment. Now, Psalm 22, I think, has been argued back and forth, whether it's talking about David or it's talking about Jesus. So let's take on the lens that this is a prophecy about Jesus.
Yeah.
Psalm 22:14 says, "My bones are out of joint." Psalm 22:16 says, "Pierced my hands and feet." And then Psalm 22:18 says, "They divide my garments and cast lots."
Yeah.
And so just his bones being out of joint, that's, on the cross, his shoulders have been dislocated.
Yeah.
So then once he is vertical on the cross, it's crazy because it's kind of a full circle moment right here talking about it. One of the most impactful moments in my spiritual walk was in college when I would attend FCA on Monday nights at Carolina. And there was a guy named Jack Easterby, and he was the chaplain for the men's basketball team, and he led FCA. Mm-hmm. And it was leading up to Easter, and he was talking to us about the crucifixion. And I had never heard it explained like this, because in Sunday school, you don't get to hear about all the gory details.
Sure.
And so I remember him standing up at the front of the room with his arms outstretched as if he were hanging on the cross, and he takes these deep labored breaths trying to show us what Jesus went through. Mm-hmm. And I just remember crying in the middle of the room with all these athletes, like, why have I never heard this before?
Yeah.
And so then reading The Case for Christ and hearing all these medical details about the crucifixion is just like, Jack was right. The Bible was right. Like, all this just makes sense. So once vertical, the crucifixion is an agonizingly slow death by asphyxiation.
Yeah.
So the stress on the diaphragm puts the chest into an inhale position. Mm-hmm. And so in order to get out of the inhale position to exhale, Jesus would have to push his body up using those pierced feet that you just explained with the stake through the ankle bone. So he's pushing up on these pierced feet. He's scraping his shredded back against the cross until he's too exhausted to continue this process. Mm-hmm. So he's forcing himself to breathe, and then he becomes too exhausted to even breathe. And the reason that's important is because as his breathing slows, he would have gone into another medical term that I didn't understand, respiratory acidosis, which eventually leads to an irregular heartbeat. So all of this put together, Metherell says that Jesus would have known when he was at the moment of death. Mm-hmm. Which then leads us to one of the things he said on the cross, Luke 23:46, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Mm. So Ben, earlier whenever we were talking about this episode, you said Jesus had these 7 sayings on the cross, and you'd read a book about it too. What was it?
Those were 2 different things, but yeah.
Okay, so the 7 sayings.
Yeah.
Did you dig into those?
I have them listed here, and I know what I know off the top of my head, which is some, but not much. I'll just list them out first, and keep in mind these are from multiple sources. These aren't all listed out in this order in one gospel or in all gospels. They are a collection of all of the sayings that have now been officially recognized once those gospels have all been compiled as the 7 things that were recorded that Jesus said. Okay. So just additional context. But from Luke 23:34, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The them and the they from that sentence is the Roman soldiers who are crucifying him. Mm-hmm. So really emblematic of the kind of ministry that Jesus had already been living out, which was one of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Then you have from Luke 23:43, "Today you will be with me in paradise." That's in reference to the criminal who was hanging on one side. You have 2 criminals, one on each side of Jesus. One of them openly mocks him, and the other one tells the first criminal that was mocking him to stop because he's done nothing wrong, but you and I are guilty of what we're accused of. And because of that recognition of who Jesus is, Jesus looks to that criminal and says, under his own authority, even hanging from the cross, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." So kind of affirming that he is the source of the salvation that the people of Israel have been seeking, and they've completely missed it, but the criminal on the cross has recognized what it means by recognizing Jesus' authority. And then this one is gut-wrenching. So from John 19, 26 through 27, this is just a snippet of it. It's not the whole thing, but woman, behold your son, behold your mother. So he's looking down at one of the disciples that's standing with his mother and essentially saying, I need you to take care of my mom because I'm leaving here.
Oh.
And don't just take care of her as if she's your mother, because especially in the first century, a woman left without people to take care of her would have been much more vulnerable than they would be today. Mm-hmm. So he's putting his household in order and making sure that his mother, who he loves, and his it's John that he's talking to. That's the disciple, and John refers to himself, and it's kind of humorous almost, as the disciple that Jesus loved, but he did love him well enough to entrust the care of his mother to his best friend. So he's looking down at his best friend and saying, please take care of my mom because I'm on the way out. So that's what I was saying about earlier, just like the further humanizing him, because he's recognizing, even though he may know the victory that's to come, is he's not going to be here anymore. So he's taking his last breaths around the 6th hour, which is sometime in the day, but I don't remember what. I'd have to look. To the 9th hour, you have darkness fall everywhere. And around that time, from Matthew 27:46, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's hard to parse out exactly what's going on here. For a long time, honestly, when I was young in the faith, I thought Jesus was mistaken, that he thought God had forsaken him, but really he never really forsook him. But then I've also heard it taught on like, God had in fact forsaken Jesus because Jesus at that moment had taken upon the sin of the entire world as the propitiation for that sin, as the sacrifice, as the sacrificial lamb. So God did in fact turn his back on him as that sacrifice. But very complex, very theologically rich statement. So now we're on to the last couple. He says, I thirst. It really does just draw out the human suffering, the physical suffering that Jesus experienced.
That kind of goes back to which of the which one was it? Oh, the hypovolemic shock. Mm-hmm. One of the side effects of that was thirst.
Yeah, and I think he had, I think medically it's called pulmonary edema, fluid on the lungs, because they stab him to check. This is after he's already dead, but they stab him to make sure that he's dead, and a bunch of fluid falls out of his punctured lung. So yeah, just I thirst. Just he's still human. He's still alive at this time, and it almost just. It's like showing us or reminding us that it's not as if Jesus was like taken out of his body or like ransomed from the physical suffering. He's there for the suffering. And then John 19:30, he says to Telestai, it is finished. And I've heard a lot of people really emphasize the idea that that's a banking term. It is, but the more interesting thing to me is that it's from the Greek word meaning completion or fulfillment. And fulfillment makes a lot of sense to me because of all the prophetic aspects of the death of Jesus. So from the Greek word teleos, meaning fulfillment or completion. So then the last thing he says, which is where we come back to where you had left off, Sam, which was, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. He's aware of the moment of his death, and he is also recognizing it's God's. Yeah, my death is God's, my resurrection is God's. By his authority, I'm coming right back.
Man, that was a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah. What a story, am I right?
Yes. Golly.
I'm like sweating just telling it.
I'm almost crying over here when he's saying, take care of my mom.
Yeah, I know.
Jeez.
One thing that went through my head, I don't have a source for this, but I recall hearing in the last year or so that in the tradition of Roman crucifixion, like Golgotha was a hill, but the cross would not have been like to where you would be looking up at Jesus, that crucifixions took place as close to eye level as you could get, because, and it was on the edge of town, so people coming in are basically seeing people in the process of dying as a very like look them in the eye reminder of don't mess with Rome.
Yeah.
And I mean, that changes the picture that's in my head, but also, like, I guess this is true of like Jesus' whole life. His suffering was not distant. It wasn't something that happened up there and people are kind of down, at a distance watching.
Yeah.
They're right there.
It's close enough for him to see and speak to his disciple and his mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that it's definitely, whether it's on a hill or not, it's intimate, and its crucifixion is a public affair, and it's designed to be and intended to be. Yeah.
I never thought about this either, but the fact that we have 7 recorded things, I mean, take all the biological things that you mentioned from Lee Strobel's book, the agony of speaking must have been awful.
Yeah, you got to get air in there to speak, right?
And multiple breaths, probably.
Yeah.
Because some of those things were longer than the others. Mm-hmm. Oof.
The vinegar sponge, too. Mm-hmm. That's just a detail we kind of skipped over, but yeah, he's thirsty. Give
One
him a
more
sponge
mean
full of
thing.
vinegar. Yeah. It's like, is it
Come
not
on.
enough?
Couldn't you just give him water?
Yeah. Interestingly, as far as like the mount or the hill, that could have been literarily significant more than historically significant, because you have these major theological moments that happen on hills or mountains, right? You have the Sermon on the Mount, which is one of the first sermon that Jesus gives. And the fact that it's on a mount is reminiscent of the, what do you call it? It goes up on the mountain, face shining. Moses at
what's the word?
Transfiguration. Thank you. So the transfiguration, but also Moses communing with God on the mountain. And then you also have the death, which takes place, at least symbolically, if not historically, on a hill, on a mount, on a raised area. And then I think, I don't really remember for sure, so fact check me on this, listeners, but I think when Jesus makes his appearance in front of the 144 or whatever, the big group, before he ascends, it's also described as being on a hill. So you have these major events that are kind of like literarily at least described as taking place on a hill or on a raised place. So yeah.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that it wasn't on a hill. I'm saying that on top of that hill, it wasn't, another.
Yeah, it's not like you're looking way up or you can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
You see churches, I think one in particular that we were in for a while, that, you have them elevated, so, the whole crowd can
look up,
can see. But hill or not, at the top of the hill where he wasn't then another 15 feet in the air.
Yeah.
Right.
It was
I like the
painstakingly
I
close.
hate, but I appreciate the meaningfulness of like that eye level idea that you were talking about. That's intense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, so the aftermath of the cross.
Yeah.
The mystery deepens.
Yeah.
So what happened moments following Jesus' death on the cross?
Okay, so again, leading up to it, you have complete darkness right up until that moment that he says, Father, into my hands I commit your spirit. Then just normal stuff, like on a Tuesday. A massive...
Friday.
Oh, yeah, good point. A massive split opens up in the curtain covering the Holy of Holies, which is super symbolic because it's the renting in two of the fabric that separated God from man. Symbolic of the fact that God is among men and the strangeness of the fact that that's happening at Jesus's death, not his birth, right? Mm-hmm. But the death of Christ is the advent of God's presence among men, because no longer is God held in the temple, he's held within man because of what Jesus has just done. And that has the stamp of authority because of what happens next, right? In addition to that, you have all kinds of other just perfectly normal things, like a massive earthquake out of nowhere and tombs opening, and the saints who had been asleep in their tombs waking up and then just walking around in Jerusalem and lots of people seeing them. What
are you doing if you're just like on your way to the well to get some water and you got...
Yeah.
Dead people walking around?
Yeah.
You got zombies?
This is post-earthquake and midday darkness.
Yeah.
So you're already knowing something odd
I would be like locked away in my home, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe not walking to the well for water.
Yeah. Then you also have the Roman centurion who played a part in Jesus' crucifixion, recognizing by all these signs, surely this man was the Son of God, which is interesting because on a literary level, I think that's from Luke, and Luke bookends his gospel with... an affirmation of who God is from a Jewish perspective, and then an affirmation of who God is from a Roman perspective. So you already see this like the crossing of the gospel through national boundaries. So it's not just Jews anymore. This is like the universalization of the truth of the gospel. So yeah, that's the immediate aftermath.
And then there's a guy, Joseph of Arimathea.
Yeah.
And so he's significant because he's Sanhedrin, right?
Yes. So isn't that an interesting fact? So they don't say anything specific about him during the course of the trial that I can recall, at least. So we don't know, like, was he quiet but disapproved? Did he speak up and then all of a sudden feel this like strong conviction that he had done the wrong thing upon seeing Jesus' death and the supernatural things that occurred around it? Or did he recognize the fulfillment of prophecies in all these different ways? It's unclear. But for whatever reason, this guy who was party to the trial is now going to Pontius Pilate and saying, can I have his body? And Pontius is like, whose body? Jesus' body. Jesus is dead. He's, for whatever reason, Pontius is literally surprised that Jesus is already dead. It's unclear.
It happened quickly, basically.
From one thing to the next, I guess, or maybe he died quickly for someone who was being crucified. Of course, this is hours and hours after the sentencing, so I'm not really 100% sure why Pontius is so surprised, but he's surprised. So then he goes to a Roman centurion and asks him, is Jesus dead? And he says, yeah, Jesus is super dead. We stabbed him with a spear and he did not move. So at that point, they turn the body over to Joseph of Arimathea simply because he asks. And then Joseph offers up his family tomb for the place that Jesus is buried. Later, there's a lot of concern about whether or not there's going to be grave robbers that come, because Jesus is obviously a public persona at this point, especially after the public trial. But also there's a Roman centurion who remembers that his followers were saying that he would be raised again in 3 days, which is especially funny because not even the disciples understood that at the time until Jesus explicitly explained them. But somehow that's made it around to this Roman centurion. So then they decide to put that massive stone that you see in all the Easter pictures in front of the tomb to seal it up. It also wasn't super uncommon to seal a tomb in the first century anyway, though.
So were there any eyewitness accounts recorded in the Gospels about his burial?
Everything from the Gospels is technically, no, that's not true. A lot of what you see in the Gospels is technically secondhand.
Okay.
And there's no mention explicitly of any of anyone who wrote a Gospel specifically seeing the actual burial or anything like that.
Gotcha.
You have them seeing, spoilers, you have them seeing Jesus after his resurrection. But,
and there were guards too, right? There were guards stationed outside of the tomb.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that the question comes up, could the resurrection claims be real or was it a hoax? And I heard something in my research today that I'd never heard before, was the swoon theory. So earlier you said he told Pontius Pilate, basically in your words, he's super dead.
Yeah.
So there's a theory that Jesus wasn't actually dead. He had fainted from all that he had been through.
Yeah.
So how do we argue against that?
I'm going to struggle with this section especially because here's the struggle that I tend to have with these kinds of conversations is, for someone who is a materialist skeptic, there's nothing beyond the material. You cannot convince me unless you use methodologies which are empirical in nature. The bar may always be set too high to meet those burdens of proof, because I don't think they're the right burden of proof or the right way of contextualizing this event. If you're looking this through, and Lee Strobel did this and he came to this particular conclusion, lots and lots of other people have done exactly that and come to the opposite conclusion. For most people that are skeptical, you will never meet the burden of proof by discussing this event in purely historical or empirical context. So it made me think of a quote from C.S. Lewis that means a lot to me when I think about these events and the believability of them. And don't misunderstand me, there's lots of good reasons, and it can be edifying to a believer to talk about some of the historical reasons why we believe Jesus was real and that these things happen. But for me, this is a better way to think about the nature of belief in the story of the gospel, and especially these events. So this is from C.S. Lewis. It says, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun is risen. This is S-U-N, sun. Sorry, you're not reading it. Not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. And that's so significant to me because there's one way of looking at it where you feel like you have to gather enough evidence to be able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that these things actually happen, versus recognizing that the significance of the story and the interpretive power it has for the world around you is a reason to believe it itself, regardless of the burden of evidence for a skeptic. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. That said, there's plenty of reasons to believe that it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So assuming that it's true, the verdict, what does that mean for us today? So we've tried our case and now we're at the verdict. If Jesus predicted his own death, was this truly an execution or was it a plan?
Even before Jesus predicted it, it was predicted like 800 years prior.
Many, many times.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The most prominent being Isaiah. You had a question on here originally, which was why was Jesus silent through all of this?
Oh yeah, we skipped over that one.
Which is fine. But now that we're talking about Isaiah, we can mention 50, 53, 58. I don't remember. It's called the suffering servant. And he's literally described in that way. 53, Isaiah 53. He's described as like a lamb being led to the slaughter, but silent. So yeah. What does the verdict mean for us today? The way it's contextualized on a literary level is that the resurrection of Jesus in particular is a seal of approval from God himself. In the same way that the dove descended at his baptism, the resurrection is affirmation of the fact that Jesus was in fact who he said he was, because transcending by his authority, even the powers of death is almost poetically significant in that sense. Yeah. So, that Jesus is the authority on who Jesus is what that means.
And another way to kind of frame it, and it's, we've basically already answered this, but was it a murder, a sacrifice, or something more? And it's everything.
Yes.
I say more, but I'll add in a seemingly unrelated piece of information. I've seen a documentary called Star of Bethlehem, and I'll tell you after I tell you what it is why I'm not as skeptical of it as I could be. And in it, the guy lays out kind of like the way Lee Strobel approached it. He was not somebody who was, an astronomer. He said, let's talk about stars and see if there's anything in the Bible that tells us what the Bethlehem star might have been. So he goes through all of that. The essentials for this conversation is that there's laws of planetary motion. So there's math that we know and have known for a long time that describes, not necessarily explains, but describes how the things move. And even at the point where those things were kind of untangled, you could do math on where things were on any particular night at a particular time, anywhere. So that's been put into software, which is not groundbreaking. It's just easier to see what you're working with. So once he kind of zeroed in on the Bethlehem star, he said, well, let's look at some other things. And things that read as like literary mechanisms, the virgin clothed in the sun, that sort of thing in Revelation, including certain other things that happened during the crucifixion, like there was a blood moon and things like that, are things that you can demonstrably see in this software on particular days in history that line up with roughly the narrative that we're given in the Bible. What's wild, and where the kind of the conclusion he comes to, is that these laws are laws.
Yeah.
Which means it was set up this way for these one-off things to happen at the time that they happened once. Yeah. Period. Which goes to the scripture that from the foundation of the world he was slain.
Yeah.
Like it's not just that his execution was part of the plan that
Jesus' plan.
Right.
Yeah. And
for his ministry.
And going out in concentric circles there, it's not just the fulfillment of the prophecy, like literally the structure of time and space in which we exist was built around this event in a way that I don't know. You can separate that out. How and why you would, that's a different conversation.
Yeah. You have the proto-gospel, proto-euangelion is what it's called. Euangelion being the word for gospel in Greek. And it's that story in Adam and Eve of the serpent's head being crushed by the heel of man. And Jesus being that man, and the power of evil, sin itself, even death, being the serpent's head that gets crushed at this event. So finally the full fulfillment of that. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, so you, listener, as it turns out, get to be the jury in all this. You get to decide for yourself whether or not the evidence mounts up, or whether evidence should even be the lens through which you look at this issue. I think I can reliably speak for the people at this table and the people that are part of this church that we believe it's all real. We believe it happened, and we believe that it's new life. The belief in it, the dependence on it is new life for us.
Amen.
Amen.